Greetings, humans. Welcome back to the Black Bill. We're talking about the existential hero in the NICU unit. I haven't written this down. I don't have a script, so I'm going to fumble my way through some ideas I'm formulating. I travel in China somewhat frequently. Not much since COVID has shut down the world, but I would spend a couple of weeks every couple of years over in that part of the world, doing therapy workshops mostly, teaching psychotherapists and counselors about how to sit knee to knee and eye to eye with people who are in distress. People are very hungry for those skills. I've trained enough people that I'm not really very much needed anymore. There are people who have those skills, who can teach those skills, and so on. The very first year I was there, my friend Mark Yang gave us something to read. I was still a student back then, and sort of following him from Hong Kong into Chengdu, where we were going to do some workshops. I was mostly a listener, and he gave us something to read while we're waiting in an airport for a bus. I get so into this thing that I'm reading the thing and I don't notice that Mark and the rest of the group have gotten up and left because the bus is here. They have to send a runner back to come get me. And the thing that I'm reading is a paper by Mark about existential heroism. And I'll try to paraphrase and sum up the best I can from this remove. The existential hero faces the truth. The truth. That's a tough concept. Done a lot of work on that here. The truth, though. That is, the existential hero prefers the pursuit of truth, no matter how ugly the truth, to seductive or beautiful lies, no matter how beautiful the lies. The existential hero lives some authentic principle, even if, and sometimes especially if, it is inconvenient or even dangerous to live that principle. This is the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King as an existential hero. A man who saw that there was an injustice, both abstract and embodied in the world, and stood against that injustice, arguing for the principles in the Constitution over the principles being displayed in society at that moment. And it was dangerous for him to do so. The results ultimately were lethal for him. He stood for it anyway. So this is why I have Martin Luther King, JFK, and Abraham Lincoln tattooed on my body. These guys were people who knew there was a right thing, stood for that thing, and they each knew that they were in personal danger for doing so. They died for it. They died for it in the end. So that's part one. Part two is, when we started this work in China, we started with academic conferences. In a place where people don't really have a history of academic conferences, and like sitting and listening to somebody expound on their theories, it just wasn't working. It wasn't working very well. It's one thing to go and say a bunch of principles, and in this case it's principles about psychology and psychotherapy, but it's one thing to go and talk about authenticity and presence and all the stuff that makes existentialists, you know, the sort of germien thing we'd say in that part of the world, the willingness to sit with people and encounter them authentically, but also to encounter truths and difficult truths authentically. So it's one thing to talk about those things, and then it's quite another thing to live those principles. And over time, we've stopped looking for presenters and guests who are good at talking about the principles, and we've started looking for people instead who in fact live authentically, who aren't afraid of death, and so forth. So part 3, I guess, is about the meaning of life. Uncle Sigmund Freud, would have said when asked, what is the meaning of life? He'd say, it's love and work. It's simple. It's love and work. And Freud was not always wrong. His methods were wrong. And so you can't necessarily give him super much credit, but he's the guy who said it, and he's right about this. Life is love and work. The meaning of life is love and work. That doesn't mean go to work and toil until your hands bleed, because that's the only meaning there is in life. It means engagement. When you're at work and your work provides you with the flow state where you lose the track of time, you are engaged. You're not doing the work with the small w, you're doing the work with the big W. And that is the meaning of life, is finding the things that engage you sufficiently that they are inherently meaningful. And relationships. Love? Yeah. Not always romantic love. Love for your children, your parents, your siblings, your country, your dog, nature, something in the abstract. But love, such that when you're in relationship, when you're in the place with the people, you lose the track of time because you are engaged. So when Freud says love and work, we can hear him saying engagement is the meaning of life. What I mean is the person living a meaningful life rarely inquires as to the meaning of life. When life is inherently meaningful, life doesn't require explication or explanation. Okay? Oh, and that brings us to a student of mine from a few years ago. She was 50-ish. She had a career of nursing behind her, and she had spent most of her career on the NICU, the neonatal intensive care unit. She worked with babies who were in trouble, babies who were in medical trouble. About half of her students died. Students. About half of her patients died. They were born so prematurely or with such medical complications that they were not viable. They could not survive. And so the student, she went to work every day with the full awareness that she was going to go to work and hold babies, cuddle them, feed them, care for them as best she could. And no matter her efforts, no matter how heroic and enlightened and perfect her performance, half of the babies that she fell in love with in this place would die anyway. How would you expect such a person to be? You might expect someone sort of battle-worn and weary, someone crusty, hardened, cynical. And if you did expect that, you would be very wrong. This was one of the most human people I've ever met. She almost glowed from inside. She had a special wisdom. She had a special wisdom. And the best way I can characterize it is this human being was nearly always crying. She was nearly always crying because she chose to love in the full light of the knowledge that love is necessarily grief. Grief and love are the same. And so, whatever we were talking about, whatever difficult thing we were talking about, she engaged with it deeply, and it got her in the emotions, and she cried. And she was nearly always joking and laughing and smiling through the tears and the hurt. She had reached this transcendental place where grief and love were the same thing. She was the existential hero, not just knowing the difficult truth and pursuing the difficult truth, but living the difficult truth and finding the beauty in that. Finding the beauty in that. A smart person can learn that there's no love without grief and no grief without love, and in the brain they're the same state, except for a little bit of interpretation around context. The wise person can learn to smile and cry at the same time. And the existential hero can do that all at once.